All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Drone Radio Live. Today is January 20th, 2016. This is our first show in the new studio. It's the same room, but as you can see, our brothel, our red velvet brothel drapes have been taken down. So we're here. Thank you for watching if you happen to be watching. As always, the show is going to be archived at YouTube once it's done. And this is going to be the first show where we break up the show into segments. You can either watch the full video archive, or you can watch any of the segments from the show at our YouTube channel, which is Multi-Rotor Forums. Okay, so thank you for watching. Tonight's show is going to be made up of news with Patrick Egan from SUAS News. We're going to have Patrick Roy from Multi-Rotor Forums. He goes by Old Man. He's going to conclude his review of the Blade Chroma CGO3. That's the 4K version, the high-end version of the Blade Chroma. And Scott Norton is here. He goes by Moto Preserve at the website. He's working the panel right now. He's going to be coming up to join us to do a safety briefing, talking to you about how to plan to be safe in the pre-flight before you even fly. And then yours truly is going to be talking to you at length, while also trying to be brief, about the basics of multi-rotor helicopters, the components, how they work, and then in order to make it all make sense, we're going to trace the power from the battery pack through the helicopter, through the power distribution to all the different components so that it makes sense for you. And that's also going to serve as our introduction to Group Build 2016. Who's excited? Anyone? Scott, thank you. Group Build 2016 is going to continue on continue a tradition we started 2 years ago, where we do a build thread at the website. As many people as we can get follow along, do a similar build at about the same time. So we're all passing the same milestones at about the same time, asking each other questions. And the group build from 2014 is still going. There's still people building Flame. It was a DJI F450 with a NASA flight controller, and over 100,000 thread views of the 2014 group build. So this is also our basics of multi-rotors is going to serve as the launch for Group Build 2016. Anything you see tonight will be a topic of discussion at Multi-Rotor Forums. So when I do my basics review, you can watch it at the YouTube archive. If you have any questions, you can go back and rewatch it. But you can always come to Multi-Rotor Forums. Post a thread, and if you put a little ampersand in front of my username, which is Bartman, that's on the screen right there, that'll generate an alert, and that'll let me know the next time I log on that somebody mentioned me in a thread. So if you have a specific question from the show that you think I can answer for you, or that you think Scott, Moto Preserve, can answer, or Pat Roy, Old Man, just put the ampersand in front of our username, and that'll show up in the thread and create an alert for us. So let's get right to the news. We're going to talk to Patrick Egan. No answer. Oh, Patrick, killing me. That was his New Year's resolution, too. He said, I am never going to be late for a call with Drone Radio Live. And here he is, the first show, and he's late. So
that was next New Year's.
Yeah, next New Year's. That was 2017. So, anyway, what can we talk about instead? You want to try Patrick Roy? Old Man? Try giving Old Man a call. We'll come back to Pat Egan. Pat Egan, you know, he comes home from work, Pat Egan. He works hard. He runs, or he's pretty involved with SUASnews.com. He gets home. He says, I got to have a big bowl of Cheerios, throw some bananas in there. And he probably hasn't finished his Cheerios yet, so he's not answering our Skype call. If that's what it is, I understand, because Cheerios are a very serious cereal, especially for that after-work crowd out in California. So I apologize. I just spoke to him 15 minutes ago and said, hey, Patrick, we're going to call you about 3 minutes past the hour. Be ready. He said, no problem. I'm going to be sitting in front of my beautiful brick backdrop just to make you jealous, Bart. And I said, great.
Old Man doesn't have a video cam set up right now.
Patrick Roy does not have a video cam.
It's just not recognizing right now.
You don't dial the video call. You just make a regular call.
Sure.
Yeah. New Year?
Hey,
New Year, same problems. Live television. Don't we just love live television? I could hear him. Patrick, can you hear me?
Oh, I'm seeing me.
You're seeing you? That's fine. You could see you.
Okay, well, that'll work.
So we're going to skip ahead. We'll come back to Patrick Egan. And we're talking to Patrick Roy right now. He lives out in Oregon, just on the Hood River. And he started back in November with a Blade Chroma, the 4K version. He's been doing a review at the website since November. He's been adding to it as he's had more and more experience, as he's uncovered different features of the equipment. And he's joining us now for a recap and a wrap-up to give us his final impressions, to let us know thumbs up, thumbs down on the Blade Chroma 4K. So let's switch over to Patrick. How you doing tonight, Patrick?
Pretty good, Bart. How are you?
Good. Hey, your video camera looks good. Congratulations.
I'm not seeing any video on the YouTube side.
Oh, that's
and
okay.
Anything live on your end, but I'm looking at myself, and I'm still pretty.
Yeah. No, you're a handsome guy. You're handsome. You also have a nice backdrop. You've got that wood paneling. I should let you guys design the studio next time. Rev 3 is going to be designed by committee instead of just me.
I don't know. I like the brothel sheets myself, but we'll keep moving.
Yeah, we won't discuss that. So you've been doing a review. It's the, why don't you tell us the full model name?
Okay, it's the Blade Chroma with the ST10 Plus and CGO3 4K camera on there.
Okay, so the ST10 Plus is the controller with the built-in video display, right?
Yes. And let me hold that up and see if I can get some of this to show through for everybody. What may show up, but I just turned it on so you get some idea of what's coming through on it.
Sure, no, that's an attractive looking piece of equipment.
It's, for its size, it's larger, it's taller, it's loud too, but it's taller than most transmitters.
Right.
But it's amazingly light, and I hate to do the hands thing, but it fits the hands pretty nicely.
Okay.
If there's anything that I had any drawbacks on it, is the fact that it's got the screen on the transmitter, which is not a bad thing.
Right.
However, it picks up glare really bad when you're outside in the sunlight, so I put the glare shield on it. I silicone mine on. So
is that glare shield is that a Horizon product, or is that an aftermarket product?
No, it actually comes with the Chroma if you get the Chroma kit. Right now they have a basic Chroma and the ST10 Plus for. I'm really upset about this, for $8.99. I paid like $10.50 for some, but that's okay. But it comes pretty well equipped. It comes with a transmitter, a battery, the charger, 2 sets of props, some tools, pretty much everything that you need to work on it if you had to.
Right.
And a nice little, lens cleaning cloth and an extra UV haze filter.
So let's go through the basics real quick. How much, what kind of flying time do you get with the camera equipment that's on there, doing your typical flying, repositioning for different angles, doing some active video shooting? What kind of flight times did you see with it?
I'm averaging 20 minutes plus.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, Horizon advertises 30 minutes, but I kind of look at that, take that with a grain of salt, because every manufacturer goes for the most optimistic conditions and setup they can go with to maximize their for their flight time. So, I'm 17 to 20 couple minutes. I mean, 25 is not unusual with other people I've to. If you fly really aggressive, you can knock it down to 15 to 17 real quick.
Right.
But that's you drop the camera, go into stability or agility mode, and literally beat the heck out of it.
Now, can you hold the helicopter up again real quick for a second? I think you did at the beginning. You were about to, and then you went for the transmitter. There we go.
Okay, the Chroma comes white, and you notice the black propellers. That's not stock. Those are the new stiffies that are carbon, and it's a little better.
And those are those Grofner props? Is that a Grofner product? It's got the Grofner profile, the blade design.
Similar to a Grofner, but the actual name, and I'd have to put my glasses on it.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
Aeronaut, and they're German-made prop.
Oh, okay.
They're aggressive in pitch, but they're quieter. A little less vibration, and it actually has the through hole on it where you can balance them, where the stock Chroma blades do not.
Right.
They're easy to balance, but motors run a little bit cooler. Do you get any more flight time? No. There is a little better performance in the angle mode, or AP mode, as Horizon calls it.
What are the basic flight modes? If you, off the top of your head, what are the basic? How many are there to choose from initially? Most of the helicopters have 2 or 3 flight modes that you can select throughout the flight, in addition to your GPS modes. But what are they? What does a Blade Chroma typically have, or what are you typically going to be able to choose from?
Your basic flight modes on a Chroma, you've got 5 modes. You've got the smart mode, which is you can't do anything wrong. Somebody that's never seen one before could pick it up and fly it in about 3 minutes.
Okay.
And then you've got an angle mode, or AP mode. That's all handled by a switch right here.
Mm-hmm.
That'll general camera stuff, where you still have a lot of stabilization, and the transmitter's doing most of the control. You don't have to remember the orientation at all. It'll go whichever way you push the stick. I mean, if you push forward, it goes forward. It doesn't matter which way the copter's oriented.
So that's like a carefree mode or intelligent orientation control, depending on the flight control system.
Yeah. Super simple loiter, what have you, but different. They do the same thing. There is 2 other modes on here. One is agility. It'd be in this position with the switch up or away from you. But when you hold this down and you push a button, I can't remember which button. You push this button like 5 times or 4 times, and that'll put you in an agility mode. Don't go there unless you're 3D qualified.
Right.
You will be. You've got 3 inches of movement before you can turn this thing upside down. It is extremely agile.
You know, I remember you saying that at the website, that compared to some of the other ready-to-fly quadcopters, that this one's manual mode, or agility mode, as you called it, is actually really capable if you want to rip this thing around. You know, take the camera mount off and just fly it in a manual mode where you're not getting assistance from the gyros and stuff.
It'll compete with an FPV racer, not in speed, but definitely in maneuverability. I mean, you can get around.
That's cool.
And then below that, you've got a stability mode, which is self-stabilizing pretty much if you get off the sticks, but you've got a lot more speed and a lot more pitch and pitch, yaw, and roll control, a lot more angle on it if you want to use it. And the bottom position is always go home.
Right.
So that's your basic 5. Now you trick that out a little bit, because on the side of the controller you've got a turtle and a rabbit here. So up is rabbit, back is turtle. Turtle, you can walk faster than this thing will go if you've got it pulled back that far. So I just keep it up in rabbit and give myself some options.
Did you have any reason to approach Horizon Hobby? Did you have questions? Were there any instances where you approached their support avenues, and did you have any need for assistance? What was your experience with Horizon as far as support goes, if you approached them?
Well, their chat people, I think they're the average modelers that are at that level. I had a couple questions about ranges and how the camera worked and this and that before I bought it, and a few things about the software, the flight controller. It didn't work out too well. They got a little confused, but that was okay. The one big question that I had, I went straight to Horizon customer service, which was about their return home altitude, because I didn't find anything in the ST10 or instructions about how to set it. Right. And that's preset basically by Horizon, and they answered it pretty quick. They said it's 30 feet. That's what it'll rise to if it's below that. If it's above that, when you go into RTH mode, it may or may not descend to 30 feet en route to the home point. So don't really depend on, if you're up at 100 feet and you need 85 to get back, make sure you got a clear path coming back, because it may come down. Mine so far hasn't. I've only used RTH 3 times, but every time I've done it, it remained at the altitude it was at. But there is a chance that it'll descend to 30 feet. So
and that's 30 feet above the elevation that it took off from. So if you're flying out in the mountains and you happen to be down in a low spot and you're out flying around a few hundred feet above your original location, if it goes into return to home, there's the possibility it'll drop down to 30 feet and maybe impact the side of a hill if that's a much higher elevation than where you took off from. I'm just saying it's a consideration, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, if you're at a higher, if the quad's at a higher elevation than what it took off from, that's a possibility. Now, most of these flight controllers, they work positive and negative in the data sets that work inside here. So if you take off at ground level and you dip down into a canyon where you're down 50 or 100 feet below the canyon, I would expect it to climb up to 130 or 180 feet
Right.
before it returned to you because at datum is your takeoff point.
Okay. Have you had any reason to inquire about parts? I would imagine with it being distributed by Horizon Hobby, parts would be readily available from vendors across the country. They have pretty good distribution and support that way.
I've had no need for additional parts. That's one of the nice things about this since I've got it. I haven't broke anything. Not that I haven't tried, but I haven't tried real hard as well. But I've been flying it out in crap conditions. I've been taking it out snowstorms and flew it around several times and really cold and but it's been absolutely bulletproof. Surprisingly so that I've come to completely trust it for what it is.
Oh, that's good.
And you know what I love is it's small. I mean, I throw it in the front seat of my pickup truck, and I got room for the transmitter next to it, and a few extra batteries, and still some spares, and nothing's banging into it. So it's really portable. It's not a big cinema drone, but it shoots pretty good photos.
I saw some of the stuff. Your company, Aerial Harmony.
Yeah, well, that's.
I saw your
Aerial Harmony, but I sell no products. So
no, I saw your Vimeo channel where you posted some of the samples from it. There was some footage from a marina, different things from your area, which looked pretty good. So I was impressed. But last question about the general, the package. I forgot what I was going to say.
That's okay.
As far as wind goes, one of the problems we've seen with ready-to-fly quads. They tend to get a little squirrely once the wind picks up. So what was your experience with the Chroma? And then also I want to know, have you had to do any software updates since you got it? And have they improved anything specifically that you're happy with that end as well? Because sometimes firmware updates can be a problem.
Let's start with the last one first, with the firmware updates. There's been one firmware update since I got it. It was easy to download the firmware. First, quick warning, if you have Windows 10, you're going to have a problem when you go to Julia in there. You're going to want to set up a virtual Windows 7 machine or 8. But Windows 10 doesn't like it doesn't like Windows 10 for some reason.
I don't like Windows 10 either.
I stuck a video in the thread about it.
Right.
The explanation of how to install the video, the firmware update, is less than vague. So I had to work around trying to figure that out and figured out finally that, I had to download it. I had to open the zip file. Once I opened the zip file, I had to store the new firmware in the folder for Chroma, and then it would see it. Otherwise, it wouldn't see it. If you just downloaded it, put it somewhere on your computer that was not in the Chroma folder, it would not find the new update. But after that, things got pretty easy. It just, okay, fine, push the button, go, and it went.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then the other question was, how does it handle the wind? That seems to be the best metric for judging the competency of the flight control system.
Well, I'm in the Columbia Gorge. The Columbia Gorge is known as the kiteboarding capital of the world.
Okay.
We don't even talk about being windy here until things bust 35 knots.
Okay.
This handles 25 mile an hour winds with no problem. It's as small as it is, basically an under 500 millimeter quad. It's rock solid.
Wow.
And it'll just park and lean into it, and it'll just sit there. And that's what really surprised me. I was figuring it's going to have to be something a lot heavier, a lot bigger, with more motors to maintain stability. But the Chroma has just been absolutely wonderful in that respect. Yeah. For what it is, for a consumer quad, I have not found anything that I really dislike about it, other than a lack of written instructions by Horizon. And I'm really starting to think that they really didn't know what they had when they put their instructions together. So,
that's an interesting perspective, that maybe they got more than they bargained for when they started distributing it.
That's my feeling, yeah.
Huh. What about, it's actually, just to finish what you were saying, it's also pretty impressive considering it's a first generation product, right? The one that you have is not a second or third generation Blade Chroma. It's pretty much a first generation product, right?
That's kind of
well. They had the Q5. They had the Q500 initially from Unique, and Blade. And we should just mention that for sake of completeness, Unique and Blade are products that are co-developed. Blade is typically distributed by Horizon Hobby. Unique develops and distributes some of their own products through different channels. But Blade is a product that's developed and manufactured by Unique for Horizon Hobby.
Yes, and I noticed Horizon's selling Typhoons now, as I saw that today. But they had the CGO2 version, CGO2 version, which was the 1080 camera, and then they have a GoPro version that came out before that. This is really difficult to find, and they got a bind and fly version. So this, I don't know, software version 2. Yeah, I'd say we're probably still on the basic first version. It's just been upgraded with cameras and so forth. So yeah, I think Unique and Horizon kind of hit a winner with the Blade.
Cool.
The ST10 and Chrome and so forth.
Just real quick, Patrick, before we move on to, or before we try to get Patrick Egan back on the line to proceed with the news coverage, how has your experience worked out with that camera, with the 4K camera that they supply? Easy to use.
There is a latency. If you want to fly this thing FPV, I recommend against it because there's a 1.5 to 2 second lag in there.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the big deal. You got to plan your shots, especially if you're going to be playing with the tilt on the gimbal. And it's really smooth, but it's not really fast. I mean, if there's an improvement to be made anywhere in this thing right now, the way it sits, that would be it. That and the propellers, and you'd be good to go.
Okay.
Lots of different settings between 1080 and 4K and white balance and scene selections and so forth. A lot of versatility and flexibility here for somebody that wants to get out and go out with the family or camping or something like that, or out to the country or the beach, whatever, shoot some fun videos. This is a good tool.
Okay, I'd just like to add that the price range right now for the different models, the low end has a fixed GoPro mount attached to it that's retailing in the $450 range, I think. It goes there's a stabilized GoPro gimbal available. Is there a 1080p Blade brand camera below the 4K camera? Kind of a step between the GoPro and the 4K?
Yeah, that's the CGO2.
Oh, okay. And then the CGO3, which is the 4K camera, the one that you have, that's about $1,100, although I think they just discounted it to $900, is it?
$899.99. You got it.
So $900 for a 4K that's actually got a competent flight controller in it. That's not a bad deal. Unique, the company that does the development of these products, is actually moving ahead with additional versions, more advanced versions. So there's more coming down the pipeline from them, which is also encouraging because that means support for your model is probably going to continue, which is always good to have, right? To know that the company's not just going to abandon it and move on to something else.
Yeah, well, I participate in some other forums, and Unique. I know, I'm sorry, but I spend most of my time over years, as you know.
Thank you.
The Unique forum and the other guys in a Chroma specific forum, and so far everybody's experience with Horizon has been exemplary.
Good.
I mean, there were some motor issues. Some people got some gritty sounding motors. I don't know if they're bad or not, but they sounded bad to the people that have them. You know, Horizon exchanged them. They just sent them out some new motors.
Right.
People have crashed them and needed a new hull.
Right.
And sent them out a new hull pretty cheap. And you don't have to split the hull, by the way, to change everything out inside. So that's kind of a good thing.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah, it's if you need to do maintenance, it's definitely set up to where the average user could get in there and do whatever. And there's parts for everything. And like I said, Horizon's been great about getting those parts to people, and that's a big deal. I mean, support to me is I don't want to need a support unit or a great warranty or something like that. I mean, the best warranty I've ever had is the one I never had to use.
Right.
When you have people that stand behind what they're selling. That, to me, is a real big point.
Cool.
And so far, Horizon's been all over it. Well, they've been good for the most part for years, but they're carrying that forward with their multi-rotor stuff.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, Horizon's a well-respected member of the RC community in general. They've been manufacturing, good quality aircraft and helicopters and engines. They've done a good job over the years. They've earned the community's respect. I should mention that as I was researching this for my conversation with you, I was at the website for Horizon Hobby looking at their information. The photos are great. The information is good. It's all presented really well. So, they're doing a good job on the marketing side, so, doing the pre-sale support as well. And we're going to have links to all of that at Multi-Rotor Forums in the thread for this episode of Drone Radio Live. We're also going to have it in the text if you're watching this on the YouTube website. You're going to see it in the text below the video screen. You're going to see links to the product page at Horizon Hobby. All right, so anything you want to add? You seem like, and we should also mention you paid for this yourself. Yeah, You've done all of this on your own dime. Horizon hasn't sponsored this. They barely respond to our emails. So it's not like we're doing them a favor by saying all this. This is just good content for our community to put this stuff out there. And you've been really generous with your time at the website, outlining all of your experiences and delving into these different things. So we really appreciate it. I want to say thank you, personally to you for doing that.
Hey, thanks for letting me put the stuff up there in this time this evening. And I want to add that as I learn more about the Chroma, because I don't know all there is to know yet. I've explored a lot, but I don't know everything. And as I learn about new products or new features, I will update the thread over at the multi-rotor shop there, and so people can come to it. And if people have questions, I do keep an eye on it. And if somebody pops in with a question, I will be more than pleased to reply.
I appreciate that very much. So thank you in advance for future support for our membership that are going to have questions for you after this. So thank you very much for setting aside time, Patrick. And I'm sorry that, it's taken us a couple of episodes to work you in. We've been saying for the last couple of episodes we were going to get to this. And it's actually worked out better that it's taken some time because it's giving you more time to keep flying it, to make some small changes, and to have a better perspective. So
I looked at it as a plus myself. So
thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great night. Get to your meeting now that you have to go to. And we'll see you back at the website.
Looking forward to it. Thanks again, and y'all have a nice evening.
Good night, Patrick. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so let's go back to giving Patrick Egan a call. Patrick Egan is out on the West Coast, so he, like I said, just got home from work. He's probably finished his Cheerios by now, and we'll see if he's available. Some of the topics right now, we go to suasnews.com for our news feed at the website, and he picked up. But just real quick, suasnews.com, they're a worldwide resource. They cover unmanned aircraft news, development stories all over the world. They have Gary Mortimer down in South Africa. Patrick Egan's out on the West Coast in San Francisco. I don't know if there's a more comprehensive resource as far as pulling in all the different stories, not just consumer stuff, but military, agency work, that type of thing. So, Patrick, how you doing tonight? Can you hear me okay?
I'm doing good. I had to do a venue change as we were having bandwidth issues. So, sorry about that, but,
it's live. It's the internet, first of all, so we have some leeway.
Well, and, technology is great when it's working.
That's right. So thank you for being here again. I really appreciate the people that set aside time in their schedules, especially everybody involved in multi-rotors somehow seem to be the most type A, too ambitious. Everybody's burning the candle on both ends, so I appreciate it when people set aside time to speak with us. What do we have in the world of SUAS news this week?
Well, there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's a lot of different things happening. One of the good things that was happening is with the UGCS company.
Yes.
And they've come up with a they've come up with a ADS-B in and out transponder.
Yes.
And actually they went out and tested it, and they were able to be seen. Mm-hmm. Yes, the equipment might be a little bit
clunky.
Let's say, whatever. But proof of concept, it's been done, and I think that they're kind of leading the way on this one, but I have been getting other emails from other companies that are like, hey, we're coming up with units that will go on these, let's say, consumer grade hobby or professional drones. So I think
Patrick, sorry to interrupt you. Just to speak real quickly to what ADS-B is. ADS-B is a transponder which goes on the helicopter. It's a piece of equipment, and what it does is it gets pinged by air traffic control services. It also gets pinged by other aircraft, which means other aircraft are putting out a signal, and this thing is responding saying, this is who I am, this is where I am, and this is my altitude. And by repeatedly pinging each other's transponders, the equipment is able to get a sense of where everybody is, where they're going, and it develops a sense of potential conflicts. Now, that's a future development or a future feature that would be worked into this. But initially, what UGCS has demonstrated is that this transponder can be mounted on a small helicopter, and it can be seen by ATC while it's in flight. And we should also mention that the information it was pinging, the information it was putting out that was picked up by ATC during the flight was actually being pulled from the flight control system, which was a DJI A2. So the A2 is providing GPS coordinates, altitudes, other information that the developers of this product were interested in sending out. And so what's significant is that this is an ATC viewable, or it makes the helicopter capable of being viewed by ATC radar throughout the flight. So go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just thought I'd give a little perspective as to what ADS-B is.
No, and I think that's good. The acronym, because we're like a definite acronym.
Yeah, I got to hear it. Say it.
Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast.
Excellent.
And there's a mandate for it in certain airspaces out in 2020, but it's not mandatory now.
Right. Not all full-scale aircraft have it yet. It's the next generation of transponders, traffic collision avoidance systems. ADS-B is the buzzword for the next gen. But it's significant that it's flown on a small aircraft using, actually also another important point that makes it significant, it was powered by the flight batteries, the 6S packs that were being used to power the helicopter. So what people saw as bottlenecks for getting this technology incorporated into our smaller size, our SUAS class of vehicles, these bottlenecks were it's going to be too big, it's going to be power hungry, and the signal may interfere in the process of blipping out all of this information. It might interfere with the flight control system itself, and they saw that that wasn't the case. So it's significant.
It is significant, and I think the thing is with that too is there's a lot of different hurdles with this technology as it's been introduced and talked about. I first became aware of it during the small UAS arc.
Right.
And somebody came in and talked about it because, the technology has actually been around for a long time. And as you'd mentioned, it's part of the next gen thing. We talked about it during the arc, hey, we could use this for sense and avoid or, detecting where these are. And then at that time, they were separate receivers or separate squawkers for the two different freaks. One GA squawks at one freak, and the 121, 135 squawk at a different freak, and then all the problems, and we kind of left it there. But that's all changing because now one unit can squawk in both freaks, and the promise is really good. The only thing is, the only Debbie Downer part of it is there is no current public or plan for the FAA to, let's say, support a public algorithm for detect and avoid.
Right.
But I think if you keep, like I said, more of these companies come up with this technology and say, hey, you know what, here it is. It's, something that looks like, this, and it doesn't use a lot of power.
Right.
I think there'll be, let's say, might be a rush to adopt it.
Right.
Maybe it's something that might not need to be,
it might not need a mandate.
Exactly, or certified for installation on the aircraft. There's a lot of variables there, but anyway, I think it's a good thing overall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It certainly shows that a lot of these hurdles that have been, whoever dreamed them up in the first place, it enables beyond line of sight operations for small UAS, which is something that, me personally, I didn't think we were going to see the potential for that for at least a few more years, and here they are doing it. So, you know, kudos to them for putting it together. I just think it's awesome that they pulled the information that was being displayed via the transponder to ATC was actually being pulled from inside of the A2 flight control system. It's not like they had their own data generator on board. They were actually pulling it from the system that was controlling the helicopter using the helicopter's batteries, which I think is amazing because I would have never dreamed that we'd be doing that today. I thought we were at least a few years away from that.
Well, and I would agree, and I would also say that's kind of amazing. You're right. You know, it's coming right out of the autopilot. That's pretty cool. It's pretty impressive. So I think, you know, stay tuned. I think that well, let me just say that. I think that there are people that understand and are investing in the software and hardware to make the beyond visual line of sight, let's say, solutions available, because really everybody sees that. I mean, really, you know, when you start talking about the, you know, let's say bucket of gold at the end of the rainbow for agriculture or whatever, really those are beyond visual line of sight operations.
Right.
So.
All right, so what's next? What else are we talking about this week? There's some rumors going around that seem to be picking up steam.
Well, there's, dude.
Come on, let's go down the rabbit hole. Go with me. Come on. It's tempting. It's not that it's a new rumor. It's just that it's taking on a more formal tone that seems to be giving it credibility. I mean, let's go there. Come on.
Okay, well, you know, I hear it from all different sides. You know, I'm hearing one that you know, people don't think the rule's going to come out for a long time,
right?
Another year, and then there's other people that say, no, you know, this DC insiders are saying that Congress is pushing the FAA so hard that they have to come out with something.
Right.
Then you have people going, oh, you know, there's not even going to be a license requirement for commercial operations. I don't believe that for 2 seconds.
So the rumor we're talking about is that people are saying that right now the FAA could be within a few months of releasing a draft regulation that will allow commercial operation. So it's going to be an SUAS commercial operating certificate. So people are talking about middle of this year, maybe May or June at the earliest, and that it would enable commercial small unmanned aircraft ops like you see here, but without the 333 exemption, without the pilot's license. Who knows? But yeah, Scott's eyes are like, wow. Scott, like a lot of us, have these things sitting on shelves collecting dust ever since the FAA started biting. They were barking for a long time, but they started biting. And so everyone was like, all right, maybe we'll hold off for a little while. But yeah, so what have you heard? That's what I've heard, that it's middle of the year, no more 333 process. It's actually a license where it's, you know, you go sit for a class, you do the operating experience, whatever, you demonstrate proficiency, and you're good to go. To that effect. Don't quote me on that.
I think there's got to be some sort of pilot's license because you have to be able to do enforcement action on people.
Right. Well, it's going to be it's going to be. They don't call it. The FAA doesn't call a pilot's license a license. They call it a certificate.
Certificate, right?
So there's going to be a certificate. You're going to have the little credit card looking thing with Orville and Wilbur Wright's image on it. And it's going to probably say SUAS, commercial operator, or operator certificate with a commercial endorsement or something. That's the way they do things. So,
well, it's a carrot and stick thing, you know. Hey, you got a little carrot, you can go out and make money. And, you know, as soon as you step out of line, we beat upon you. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, you want my personal opinion?
No.
I'm going to, okay.
No, I don't want your personal opinion. Come on, we could all be as cynical as we want to be. But it's just interesting that, you know, there's been rumors over the years. This particular rumor is got a little bit of a different, it's got a little bit of a different handle on it, which is making it a little more interesting than past rumors.
Well, let me just say this. I forget, it was a high-ranking official from the FAA.
Right.
You know, testified last June to Congress, and they tried to pin him down. When? We want a date. And he said, you know, oh, by June of next year, it's going to be out. And I really, somebody's going to be in the hot seat if it doesn't happen.
Okay.
So I'm going to say, you know, okay, it should happen. Now, I know that, you know, the White House had it and they were horsing around with it. And then supposedly I heard it got kicked out. So it might be getting work done. I'm going with June. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if this guy that guaranteed Congress that it was coming out by June, it doesn't pan out. Somebody's in deep doo-doo. So
I'm going to start lining up clients. That's how confident I am.
Exactly. And I agree. I'm kind of doing the same deal. I'm going to kind of position myself for the June thing and other people. Now, the registration thing, I got to be honest with you. I don't like the registration thing at all.
Yeah.
That was another news story from the week.
Yeah,
I made comments on behalf of the RCAPA that were at SUS DIEZ if you want to read them. Some people said that, there was kind of a lull in my commentary for a while, and they thought maybe I was calming down. And then after that piece, they were like, "Well, you turned up the heat again." I think we need to step back and take an objective look at what's going on and say, "Hey, do we want to be a part of this?" The drone registration thing is registering people and not drones. I don't like to be on lists.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on lists, but nothing official.
Yeah, you know what? I've got a lot of airplanes. I've got helicopters. If they were to, I'd have to hire an assistant just to register all my aircraft. If they were to register aircraft. I mean, there'd be legions of people looking for assistance in Craigslist just to register all these individual aircraft. I don't know if there was any other way to do it. I hate the process. I hate the concept. I hate the fact that the FAA got themselves backed into a corner where they had no other choice but to do something, and then it ended up being that registration process. But, let's not even go there. We've beaten that one to death. What was the last thing? You had said there was a third thing that you thought was important that you wanted to talk about. It was different from what I had on my list. But what were you? What was it that you wanted to bring up?
Okay, so that the Small Unmanned Systems Business Expo is right around the corner.
April,
end of April in San Francisco, and it's shaping up to be another barn burner. We just confirmed Mr. Tad McGeer. And people that don't know who Tad McGeer is, he basically came up with Aerosonde and Scan Eagle. He started in situ with a couple of other guys, and this guy he'd probably hate it if he heard me say this, but some people consider him to be like the Steve Jobs of drones. This guy's been doing it forever. He did the first unmanned transatlantic flight in 1998.
Wow.
He's got a whole bunch of firsts under his belt. His new aircraft, a flex rotor, there's some videos. Very impressive. It's a VTOL aircraft. The tail actually splits into 4 segments, and it lands on the tail. It's very impressive. So people should check that out, aerovale.com. He's going to speak. We got some other good people. We got NASA, people from USDA.
Right.
We got somebody from the Cinematographers Guild out of Los Angeles. So that's going to be really good. I did tweet out this: if you can't get the time off of work, you may want to think about quitting your job.
Okay, I'll remember. I'll take that into consideration. We'll post a link to your website for that show. We'll post a link to the person that you just mentioned. I forgot his name was a little. What was his name again?
Tad McGeer.
Tad McGeer. We'll post a link to his information at the website and also in the text below the YouTube viewing window. Is there anything else? We're going to wrap it up, and Scott's going to come out and do his safety briefing if you don't have anything else to add.
No, that's about it. We were going to talk about my bio, but really the only thing that's important is that I have drone in my Twitter handle. That qualifies me as an expert.
If there's one thing that I've come to admire, it is the self-certification process for experts on Twitter simply by having drone in your Twitter handle. Now, I have 2 Twitter handles. Only one has drone in it. So does that qualify me more or less in the scheme of things? Where do I fall on the totem pole if I have 2 different Twitter handles and only one has drone in the name?
I'm going with loser, man.
Oh, God.
But,
and I suppose my invitation to speak at your conference is in the mail. I'll look for that next week, but that's okay. Well, it's all right, Patrick.
It's not only Twitter handles.
He never lets us down.
$4.99 and a self-addressed stamp down.
All right. Well, thank you for making time for us. The next show is next Wednesday, so pencil us in, okay? We'll find something else to talk about. We're not doing every other week after this episode. We're going to have next week, and then the next show will resume the bi-weekly schedule after that. I think it's February 10th. So if you have time for us next week, we'll talk to you next Wednesday night, okay?
Sounds good. Keep the right side in the air and all the rest of that. Talk to you later.
Yes. Thanks, Patrick. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so next up we have Scott Norton, also known as Moto Preserve. He's going to talk to us about how you plan to be safe before you take off. And he's going to use the feature that we've added to the studio known as a door. Scott, come on in. He's coming in from stage left.
Secret doors.
The secret door. He has a Goupolini collection that must be incredible. You know what a Goupolini is?
I don't.
That's an Italian word for like a knit cap. Although yours isn't knit. That one is, oh, that's knit.
It's always the same cap, although I did get a new cap for Christmas.
Is that reversible, maybe?
But I haven't.
What are you hiding under there?
I haven't broken it out yet.
I feel like I should wear a sympathy cap when you come on. Anyway, see, we're going to talk about safe. We're going to do this together. We have Bill, our new studio manager,
Go Bill.
behind the controls. Welcome to the operation, Bill. You want to give a shout out?
I rock.
I rock. He fits right in.
Yeah, exactly right.
So anyway, we're talking about how you plan to be safe before you actually take off and start flying around all those people that have stepped up to watch you.
Exactly right.
So
I did want to say Patrick was awesome.
Yeah, he's a good guest. I don't know where I found him from. He crawled out from under a rock, and we said, "Sure, come on, be on the show." And what do you know? He delivers.
He's the ringer. So this week we're going to talk about a little bit about planning for a safe flight. I think when you first mentioned it to me, which was not all that long ago,
right.
I thought it was a great idea. I think you have been really good about mentioning safety at the end of each episode. You've been talking about keeping it safe and whatnot.
It's important.
I think the first thing that I thought about when you first mentioned that was actually how there's... in the beginning, when I first started flying, I had a tendency to be so amazed by the technology that I almost just trusted in it blindly.
Sure. Yep.
That didn't last very long.
Plus, there's so much anxiety around those first flights that you're not really thinking about.
And you almost you're
what can I do better?
You're wishing it to go well. Obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't want accidents to happen.
Right.
Then you have accidents. So then you have to move on.
Sure.
So I think I've broken it down into a couple different segments in terms of my safety setup. What I try to focus on is both the surroundings and then also the mechanical. I sort of split that up.
Sure. There's the aircraft, and then there's the environment around the aircraft.
Exactly right. So just keeping an eye on your surroundings and stuff. I sort of start with just a basic getting a lay of the land. When I was fortunate enough up in Vermont to be able to fly with a very, very low population density.
Sure.
But I have obviously flown in places that were a little bit thicker with population. So the first thing that I always try to do when I get to the field is kind of take a look around, make sure that the place, especially new places. If I was flying at the AMA field that I was in the club that I was a part of, obviously I knew the lay of the land. I knew where all the wires were. I knew
exactly
any pitfalls were going to be.
Right.
But anytime you're going to someplace new, if you're flying a smaller craft and you're doing it at a park that's off on your own and you feel safe about it, there's still some things that you need to check out. And some of those things would be, like I mentioned, power wires can definitely wreak havoc with the electronics.
Yep.
You could also obviously just physically fly into them.
Sure.
I think just kind of getting a sense of how close or far you are from the people that might be around is also important. I think it's important to let people know that what you're doing, that it's not safe. A lot of people don't know about this technology yet. It's obviously in the news a lot more than it ever has been, but there's still people that are green to it.
Sure.
So letting them know, hey, I'm going to be doing what I'm doing. There are going to be spinning propellers. They can be dangerous. Make sure you don't approach the craft.
Right.
And just giving them a basic heads up.
Because ultimately, I mean, part of what we've talked about in the past is this is now an aircraft. So the FAA is treating it like an aircraft, and just like any other pilot that flies, you are the ultimate responsibility. You are ultimately responsible for every aspect of the flight, and the FAA is going to hold you to that. So if you want to go out there and do this, and if there's people collecting around your operation, it's your responsibility
to call it and say, I need to take the actions that...
Right, and if you're not comfortable doing that, talking to people who might step up and be putting themselves in harm's way...
Then you have to choose a different location.
Then you have to choose a different hobby.
Yeah, exactly right.
So
yeah, and I think, and it's been said before, I mean, we are ambassadors of this new hobby.
Every time we fly.
Every time we fly. So we have, not only do we have the responsibility to our personal crafts that we're flying, I think it's also important to keep in mind that my actions could very well affect your actions or Bill's actions.
With the new studio, let's switch sides.
Let's switch sides.
And that way you can...
Safer?
Yeah, let's just do this real quick, the time that it takes.
Yeah,
and that way, Bill, running the equipment for the first time tonight.
Okay, we're over here.
We have our glancing shot off to the side here that we can use to get Scott when Scott's talking.
Yeah.
We're breaking in Bill. Trial by fire. What other way is there? So go ahead.
So basically, just in terms of the basic gist of the location where you are, obviously taking into account any kind of physical, whether it be structures, power lines, fences, anything, the trees that are around you, obviously having, making sure you're in an area that you can handle.
Right.
Taking care of letting people know, either obviously getting away from people so that you don't feel that you're going to be infringing on their personal space, or if there are people around and you feel comfortable enough to fly, you want to make sure that you can explain to them it's best not to approach the craft, this is what I'm doing.
And if people are standing kind of in the direction that you're going to be departing from your little spot where you're working, you need to say, excuse me, but I'm going to be, that's kind of like my departure corridor, and I need to go out that way, so you need to move 30 feet or 40 feet to the side. Yeah,
and I think that the last big thing about the physical surroundings is that, and this is a general thing, I think you need to focus on having, if not a specific flight plan, you need your outs. You need your safety landing zone.
So
you have to prepare for the worst.
Plan your plan B, C, and D
before
you're in the air and before the motor fails or before the GPS starts sending it off in some odd direction. So when you react, you're reacting in a way that you've already considered.
And it's not foreign to you. Exactly right. And I think we talked about it's same with a motorcycle.
Sure.
First thing they would ever tell you about riding a motorcycle is to make sure that you know you're out. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you have no out. If you're tailgating too much, obviously you have no out. You need to be able to have enough space, enough distance, enough safe place around you to make a choice, and as you say, a B, C, or D, because something, chances are, could go wrong.
Right. The way they put that in flying, they say, don't let the airplane go someplace where your brain already hasn't been.
Right.
So
don't
let the airplane get out in front of your brain, or let the helicopter, the multi-rotor, the SUAS, the drone with quotation marks around it.
The possibly soon to be legal to use commercially.
Soon to be legal. When that happens, I'll drop the mic and run out. I'll be like, hey, got to hit the FISDO. All right, so what else do we have? What else are we talking about in terms of making ourselves safe before we take off?
Okay, I think the next big thing, and this is something which would be probably already on the minds of people that are building their own, but if you've gone out and you've bought an RTF, some of these things might not be, in terms of the actual mechanics, might not be top of mind before you head out to the field. Obviously, oftentimes people are buying these things and they're delivered in a completely flyable state.
That's right.
Supposedly. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be checking some things. So in terms of basic checks, it's always a good idea to check wires, connectors, making sure batteries are secured, that they're not moving around, because obviously that can also pull on some connectors. I think for me, always running through a quick rundown of my fingers on doing a quick rundown with my fingers on the props, just to make sure that there are no nicks or cracks, and nothing that I've missed. Speaking of props, I also will run up, spool up the motors, just letting them idle in the arming sequence, just to make sure, triple check. I do a quick release, triple check that they're on the right direction.
Right.
It may or may not have happened once where I put all of them on well, it was a weird Chinese directions thing, but I ended up putting on the props all completely on the wrong direction. So the minute I armed, all of them perfectly went in a perfect circle. Nothing broke. It was in an open field. But that kind of thing can happen. Fortunately, the quick releases were just on the opposite motors. But
this is cathartic, you know, admitting these things.
Hey,
you know?
I mean, it happens. And you know what? I think of that every time. That's never happened again. But it's worth keeping in mind, because if there's something wrong with the prop or it's broken, as opposed to finding that out when it's 10 or 20 or 100 feet in the air,
right.
better to find it out early on. Also, I think specific to locations and pre-flight check, making sure you do the calibration setup for anybody who's using GPS. Obviously, many of the flight controllers at this point,
and especially
if not a majority of them, have GPS. So.
And especially know the tones that the flight control system is going to make, or the lights.
Right. Exactly right.
And if you don't have the lights committed to memory, have them
in your pocket.
In your pocket. So that's what I do too with my NASA, the A2.
And
I always have those LED
codes.
codes.
Yeah. And I just have a little cheat sheet. I keep it right in my toolbox. That's always
right. So know your codes, know your sounds. If it doesn't sound right, don't just keep calibrate until you get the thing. Stop. Remove power from it. Give it a visual inspection. See if there's some reason, maybe a chafed wire along the frame somewhere. But all this stuff you're doing before you fly.
Yeah, to ensure that when you fly, no surprises.
Exactly.
Or as few surprises as possible.
Exactly.
And I think, I know we were going to try to keep this quick and kind of short.
Why should tonight be different from any other night?
I think we should try to do it. Hey, it's a goal.
Bill's laughing at me.
I think that...
have to be home.
Yeah, Bill's mom. Bill's mom said he has to be home by 10:30. So
I think the most important thing, just in terms of a mindset for flying safe, is not to try to muscle through it.
Yeah.
I think there is so much. You mentioned the anxiety that sometimes the companies get into the field and getting ready. I think there's just pure excitement sometimes. I think sometimes we will it to be okay. I think that there have been times early on when I looked at something, I wasn't positive something was wrong, and I found myself saying, I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah,
and then I had to stop myself and say, you know what? I don't really think it's fine. If I'm even questioning it, there's probably something wrong. It's probably worth taking the time to check it out and kind of do a double take. So I think just in general, there's just some very basic. We could obviously go into a lot more detail, and maybe we'll add some things onto the
and everyone's experience is going to be different. If you have experiences where you fly and you say to yourself, wow, I should have caught that before I flew, put that on your personal list. Put that on your list of things that you keep right in the front of your brain before you fly. Between the time you get out of the car and the time where you actually launch the helicopter, have that in the front of your brain where you say, that's another thing that I need to keep an eye on.
I will say also, and I think I use my phone. Some people might just rather use a pad and paper. I have an actual checklist, and it might not be a very official, something like you guys might go through before you're ready to launch, an airplane.
Yeah, no, the checklists are a great way to do business.
And why that actually comforts me is because I know that I will go through that list, and so I don't spend half the time worrying, have I forgotten something? I have a comprehensive list. As long as I go through it, some things are small, some things are bigger to check. But as long as I have it, I think it gives me peace of mind to know that I've gone through the list.
Checklist procedures have established themselves as such a good way of doing things that actually, you have all these people that go into the hospital because they blew out their right knee and they end up replacing the left knee. In the operating room, hospitals have actually consulted. Hospitals have actually been consulting with aviation people saying your checklist procedures are something that we want to incorporate into how we do business because we just make too many mistakes. So why would we think operating SUAS that we're immune from that, that we can't use that to our benefit as well? So that's good for you. And your phone, you took it upon yourself to do that.
This is a sentiment
only the best at Drone Radio Live, I should say. Multi-rotor forums, we just bring that to the table. It's just how we are.
And this is a sentiment I've said with a few things in the past. It's not that hard.
No.
It doesn't take but a second to do it.
You're right.
Take a couple minutes before you head out. When you get to the field, you do the things that you know that you should. Check your surroundings. If there are things you think you might forget, write them on a list. It's that easy. It doesn't take but a second to do it. So
very good.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you making a contribution to the show.
We'll swap sides again.
And again, Scott goes by Motor Preserve at the website. If you have any questions for him, just ping him at the website using the signal, followed by Moto Preserve in one of your posts, and it'll automatically generate a notification for him the next time he logs onto the website. Scott also, his day job is motorcycle repair. He repairs vintage motorcycles, all the old British stuff, the old Jap stuff. That's what he does over in Brooklyn. So if you're on the East Coast, if you're into motorcycles and you need a shop for storage in the New York City area, or you need some maintenance, by all means, I'm more than happy to give him a plug when we're here doing the show. So we're an hour into it, and we're going to do our featured segment now, and that is basics of multi-rotor helicopters. We started the show back in October, and we were so motivated to do the best show possible with this killer content. We skipped right over all the basics and stuff. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to start 2016 with a quick overview, and this is also going to serve as the launch for our group build 2016. The group build, what we're all building this year, is a basic FPV quad. Now, you could take what we're doing and do it on the scale of a racing quad, like 180 millimeter or a 250 millimeter racing quad. But what we're talking about is something more along the lines of a flame wheel, like an F450 or an F550, and the ability to carry both an FPV camera and maybe a GoPro so you can record the flight, or a Mobius, or what's that other one called? The Legend, I think, from Foxeer. So an action camera, an FPV camera, maybe a stabilization gimbal, so a little bit more lift than you might have, or a little bit excess lift for some of these extra things compared to what you might have with your typical FPV racing quad. So that's the goal for the group build. So this first review, what we're going to do is we're going to look at all the parts, and then what we're going to do is we're going to trace the electricity out of the battery through the helicopter and talk about how that distribution works to get all those elements of the helicopter power so they could all do their part and make their contribution. So real quick, let's look at the parts. I'm going to put my glasses on. It's going to make a little glare. So what we have in a basic helicopter, and when I start, you're going to say this can't be true, but it is true. All these different components that I'm going to talk about are typical for any helicopter. Any helicopter might have differences in terms of specifics, but they're all generally using these components together as a system to make the helicopter. Whether it's a small one like this, my old MQX, which I still love to fly, this little Kodo, this little, let's go off to the side, Bill. This little Kodo is a micro quad, and there's some differences here from some of the bigger ones, brushless versus brushed motors, but this one's slightly larger. Slightly. This is a frame. This is a frame that I designed. I mention this from time to time because people say, "What's up with that funky frame?" That's my own. That carries a DJI ZenMuse H3 3D, so it's a GoPro 3 with a 3D gimbal and a DJI A2 flight control system. That helicopter is using all of the components that we're going to talk about here. So once you understand this stuff, it isn't so much a matter of can you build one for yourself anymore. Now it's just a matter of what is it that you need to build to satisfy your goals. Okay, so first we start off with a frame. Now the frame can be anything from, my good friend Mike down in Houston used to love building quads with towel rack bars from Home Depot. Those metal square tubes that you get with the towel racks, they're paper thin metal, and they're super cheap, super lightweight. He used to make frames with them and they worked great. He used to go out and do photography with them all the time. But I've got a couple frames here, and this is the one I'm going to use for my build. I'm using the Hobby King version of the F550 hexacopter. I'm actually going to build it as a quad with my little XY frame layout. But when it comes to frames, man, just about anything will work. So these are the frame plates. These are the frame plates, right? These are the arms that bolt in. But you know what? This could just as easily be a piece of plexiglass with some square wood pieces that you might have ripped on a table saw, or you might have bought them off the shelf at Home Depot or somewhere. And the motors, so long as you screw the motors to it, you know, to hold it in place well enough, a frame does not have to be a $1,000 investment, okay? The frame can be something that holds all the components in place, doesn't allow an unnecessary amount of vibration to go through and to mess up the camera placement or the video quality. But There are a lot of options from inexpensive to very expensive, and homemade is always an option if you happen to be handy. So don't get too carried away with the frame selection, okay? Now, with the frame, the next thing that you would have are motors. Now, with these helicopters, there's a couple differences that are basic, okay? These are brushless motors, and you know they're brushless motors because there's 3 wires coming out of them, okay? Brushless motors and brushed motors work pretty much the same way. They both have an electromagnet, and here's a much larger one. This one's from this is about a 25cc gas engine equivalent. It's a Turnigy motor that I bought for a profile RC plane. So most of the time, these have a little spring clip down on the bottom that keeps them together, keeps them from coming apart. So I took the spring clip off before I left the house today so I could pull this apart. Ah. Thank you, Bill. That was great timing. I'm glad you found that entertaining. Anyway, so here's the motor. This is the bell, it's called, and these are the windings, or this would be called the armature on an older brushed motor. But what happens is you have permanent magnets in the bell, and you have electromagnets in the armature, or the poles. And what happens is these windings are activated in a sequence that causes them to repel these magnets. So when this is all put together and it's running, these things are very high speed, switching on and off, pushing the magnets, causing the motor to turn. Now with a brushed motor, the same exact thing is happening, except the armature sticks out a little bit and there's segments around the shaft, and the electricity is being fed to these different coils via brushes. The brushes are a conductive material that rides the ring and delivers electricity to different parts of these inner windings in order to sequence the power and make the motor turn. Now this is all kind of complicated. It's hard to explain with fixed things here without like some sort of sample video, but we'll talk about this at the website. If you have any questions, we can go into it. I can throw up some YouTube links where these things are explained more completely, but most of the time your smaller quads like this are actually going to have brush motors, and you can tell because there's 2 wires instead of 3, okay? So these both have brush motors. Brush motors, unfortunately, wear out. They're not as long-lasting, they're not as powerful as brushless motors. But for small quads like this, man, they work great. They make enough power. They work well with the battery power that they fit into these. So as a whole system, they're great. This thing flies awesome. I challenge anyone not to tell me that this thing isn't still a pisser to fly in a gymnasium or something. So brush motors versus brushless motors. Most of your small ready-to-fly quads, the really small stuff, is going to be brushed. The stuff that you're going to build that's going to be a little bit larger is almost always going to be brushless. So brushless has 3 wires, brushed has 2 wires. Props. To build your helicopter, you're going to have 2 different propellers. One set is going to turn clockwise. Excuse me. The other set's going to turn counterclockwise. And when half of your motors are turning one way and half of your motors are turning the other way, when all of that spinning mass is balanced, the helicopter will sit stable in the air. When one half of those props are turned a little bit faster than the others, the helicopter is going to torque in reaction to those spinning props. So the yaw of the helicopter is actually controlled by these different turning props being sped up or slowed down depending on the direction that you're trying to yaw. So when you buy your props, you're going to buy half of them as clockwise, half of them as counterclockwise. There's all different blade designs. And if you're getting started with your first build, if you're joining us for this group build, you might say, well, I don't want to waste a lot of money on props. You know, get over it. You're going to waste a lot of money on props. I've got boxes of propellers at home, 3 blades, wood, carbon fiber, plastic, orange, black. I'll have some green ones by the end of this year, I'm sure. But so the props are something where a lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is getting recommendations from other people online, especially at a high-quality website like multi-rotorforums.com. But just to give you an idea of what you're looking at in terms of differences, I really like Zor wood props. They have a nice blade profile. You know, they're not too thin. They're not too, you know, this is a real wide, this is the cord. The line from the front to the back is the cord. So this is a really wide cord prop. Something like this is a very narrow cord prop, okay? The line, the distance from the front to the back is very short. These are very thin. The blade profile is thin. So this prop right here doesn't make lift so much by, or this prop doesn't make a pushing force so much by lift created by this airfoil, this thing is just kind of beating the air into submission and displacing air more like a pump and forcing itself through the air. Something like this prop that actually has a little bit of thickness to the blade, it actually has a nice airfoil profile to it. This is actually making lift like a wing, like a sailplane wing or any other airplane wing, and it's actually creating a propeller force by lift. They're all doing that, but some do that more than others. Something like this is making a lot of lift. It's a slow fly prop from APC. These are popular with little sport flying helicopters that aren't doing real heavy lift. So I've also got this big propeller, just in case you can't see. This is from an 80cc gas engine, but again, has a nice blade profile, nice thick cord. So this prop is going to make a lot of lift. It's going to be efficient at doing it. Never let the price of the components discourage you. If you want to fly and just get out there and experience this hobby, there are always going to be components that you can use that will get you flying. Don't worry about buying the most expensive stuff. Don't worry about buying the best stuff. There are a lot of low-end components that work great, that are going to give you a ton of fun, and are going to allow you to learn and develop and be ready for when you might be able to buy some of those better components. Okay, so after the props, we have the batteries. Now, we're just going to talk about lithium polymer batteries. Lithium polymer batteries are all the same as far as the chemicals, the chemistry, what's going on inside the battery that makes it produce electricity. And because of that chemistry, the individual cells, they don't really design the cells. Nobody goes to the lab and says, today I'm going to design a cell that makes 3.7 volts per cell. Nobody said with NiCads, hey, Bill, why don't you go in the lab next week and design a cell that makes 1.2 volts per cell? And Bill came back and said, oh, I found the perfect combination to give you 1.2. No, they do the chemistry, and the chemistry is what dictates the voltage that each cell is able to produce. So with a lithium polymer battery pack, these individual cells are able to make 3.7 volts, and that's a nominal thing. They make a little more when they're fully charged, a little less as they're being depleted. But what we have, and this is important to understand, there's cells and then there's packs. So an individual cell looks like this little rectangular thing. Let's go to the side view, Bill. See if we can see that. Okay, so this is a lithium polymer battery pack, and it's made up of 3 individual cells. Now, some people think that the Chinese don't make high-quality products, but somewhere in China is a factory that makes the world's strongest double-sided tape I've ever seen, and they use that to put these cells together. So this pack is 3 cells that are taped together, and if you've ever tried to pull these apart, it's almost impossible to do it without damaging the pack. This battery pack is actually completely dead, so I was able to rip this apart and then mash it back into shape, and I'll throw it away after this show. But I just wanted to show you that even this big brick of a battery, it's a 6-cell pack, it's 11,000 milliamps, which is a high-capacity, higher voltage battery pack. This thing is made up of individual cells just like these that are 3.7 volts each, okay? And then this is a smaller pack like what you might have on your FPV racer or in some of your foamy park flyers. They're all the same chemistry, so all of these are making 3.7 volts per cell, and then they make higher voltage packs by putting more cells together, wiring them up in series, which means one battery goes into the next, that one goes into the next, and by putting them together in series like that, they get higher voltages. So those are your batteries. And I should just say real quick, batteries are always going to have, multi-cell packs are always going to have the power leads, which are the heavier duty wires, usually with a heavier duty battery connector. And they're always going to have this other multi-wire plug, or tap we call it, and that's going to be for charging the packs. Most of the bad reputation with lithium polymer packs, catching fire when they're charging, comes from when they first hit the market, when the chargers were trying to charge them like any other battery pack with just a couple of leads hooked up to the main power wires and charging it like it was one big battery. What happens is these individual cells, some of them, they're not identical no matter how well manufactured they are. Some of them, this cell might take a charge a little bit faster than this other cell. So when the pack just keeps getting charged and charged and charged, some of these individual cells might charge up first, and then they start to get hot because they're being overcharged and they catch fire. So the way they've gotten around that to make these packs a lot more reliable and useful for different industries and, you know, us in the hobby business, they have what's called a balance charger. So the balance charger actually uses this tap with the multiple wires coming out of it, and it charges each cell in the pack individually so that it's monitoring all the cells and it's monitoring the voltage of the cells, and it's monitoring them to the point that if one cell is taking a charge better than the other ones, it's going to limit electric to that cell and allow the other ones to catch up. So it's balance charging the pack, which is a huge, huge advantage if you want to keep your house, your car, your pets from catching fire during the charging process. These batteries are very dangerous, and if we're going to talk about basics of multi-rotor helicopters, you should know right off the bat, these batteries are dangerous. Okay, you shouldn't keep stacks of these things fully charged in your house. After you're done flying and they're discharged a pretty good amount, just leave them like that. They're better off that way anyway. They last longer. But if they come back damaged, if you wiped out and you know, the corner of the pack is damaged, or it's perforated, or they're really heavily puffed and they get hot when you use them, stop using them. Damaged cells, puffed cells are a fire hazard. Don't put them in your house, and always charge on a hard surface. Always charge where there's access to a door or a window. You would not believe, I took a battery pack, a 6,000 milliamp 4-cell pack, and I took a pickaxe, and I said to my son, hey, watch this. And I put the pickaxe through the cells. It immediately started smoking, and it is unbelievable how much smoke comes off of these packs when they're shorted out like that and when they're damaged and they catch fire. The thing burned for 40 minutes. It was like a smoke bomb in my backyard, and the smell was the most toxic thing. I mean, I've smelled burning epoxy, carbon fiber that, you know, I touched with a heating iron by mistake, so it burned the epoxy and the composite material. This stuff is the most toxic thing I've ever smelled. If this caught fire in your basement and you're saying to yourself, oh, I'll be able to get down there and carry it outside, you'll be dead before you make it back to the steps. They're that bad. So that's my warning. I hope that saves somebody the grief of having to deal with a battery pack on fire. So next we go to the flight control. Got my little box of goodies here. The flight control is a board that has a computer chip and then sensors. It has lots of plugs attached to it. It has some mounting holes. And what you're going to do with that is fly your helicopter. Now, this is an old Hoverfly Pro board, which makes a great display board because it's so big. Newer boards are smaller than this. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to run firmware in these little computer chips. That's just like the computer sitting on your desk or your laptop or in your car. It's going to run the firmware. It's going to sense the motion of the helicopter, and it's going to control all the motors individually. That's how these things fly. They fly because these motors are being controlled by this flight control board or by a flight control board. And the ability of that flight control board to manage these motors individually is what allows it to fly. So if this helicopter, and I call it a helicopter, some people on YouTube like have a thing about calling it a helicopter. It's a multi-rotor helicopter. So in order to avoid saying multi-rotor helicopter every single time, I say helicopter. It makes sense, but people on YouTube are flaming me saying, it's not a helicopter. It's not a helicopter like single rotor, it's a multi-rotor, colloquially known as a helicopter. There's a word, we'll look that up, we'll link to it on the site. But anyway, so what happens is when this thing is sitting here hovering and it's not moving, that's because it's in equilibrium, it's balanced. Each of the propellers is making the same amount of lift. It's making it nice and flat or level, so it's not going to move. Now, if you want it to move this way, you have to lean it forward a little bit, right? And to do that, it's going to speed up these back props. It's going to slow down these front props, so there's going to be a little imbalance. And as it leans forward, as soon as that thing takes an angle, it's going to start going in that direction. So if you want it to go backwards, the flight control board is going to speed up the front motors. It's going to slow the back motors, and it's going to lean it backwards. And as soon as it starts to take on that angle, it's going to start moving. Now, when it starts to move, if it's not a real sophisticated flight control system, it might start to descend because now it's not making as much lift in the vertical direction, so it's going to start to descend. So you have to add a little power. But the flight control system is managing each of these motors individually. If you've never flown one of these, if you've never had one in your hand, if you've been just amazed at what they do, That's how they work. The flight controller, via these different sets of pins, each pin set is going to a different motor controller, and they're all being controlled independently. And some flight control systems are good for 6 motors, some are good for 8. There's some flight control systems out there that are flying 12 or 16 motor helicopters, and they're doing it well. They've got a lot of processing power on board. They've got great firmware. But that's the basics of how it works. So there's a lot of other things that would go into a helicopter build, and I'm not going to go into every single one in detail. We could talk about it at the website. We're going to talk about all this stuff as we continue to do the group build. But real quick, the thing that gets everybody hung up is power distribution. You hear us talk about, oh, I'm going to get a power distribution board for this build. What that means is they're going to get a board that looks something like this. This one's pretty old, doesn't have a really high power capacity. But what it does is it allows you, and how it's made real quick is it has a metal layer on top, a metal layer on the bottom, and they're separated by what is called an insulator in electricity speak. And that just means the insulator doesn't allow electricity to pass from the top layer to the bottom layer. And what it does is it allows you to plug the battery into this board and then distribute the power to different parts of the helicopter that need electricity, like your motors, like your flight control system, like your LED lights that flash and blink so it looks like your little cop car quad running around the park or whatever it is. So this power distribution board, that's a very common word that you hear. This is where people's brains lock up. They say, Bart, I understand motors. Your little demonstration with the MQX, that's cool. I understand the flight control system has sensors and it's all being run by software. But like when you tell people now the battery has to power all these different things and you have to come up with some way to do it, their heads explode all over their workbench. And they just, you know, we don't all come from these, I don't come from an electrical background. Do you come from an electrical background, Scott?
In the studio somewhat.
Oh, you're lying. He made that up. No, so it's power distribution, taking the power from the battery, from the big thick wires that are delivering the power into the helicopter, and then distributing it through increasingly smaller wires to where it has to go. Now, this is a harness that I had made for a helicopter a while back, and this is another option for power distribution where you take wires and you bare sections of them, you wrap them together and solder them, and then you put insulation around it so that you could plug in your batteries and then run wires out to where, this is when I was mounting motors on the ends of the arms. I was using this loom or this harness to take the power from in where the batteries are out to the arms, out by the motors.
A lot of people call that a squid.
A squid? I've never heard of squid.
Because it looks like a squid.
Ah, I guess it could.
The key is like the power distribution is the hub.
Yeah, it's
It's a hub, right?
It's a central point where the power is applied and then distributed out to all the different parts of the helicopter. Here's another example of one. This is a really small one by Microcopter, and it also has I2C distribution, which is a microcopter thing for the motor controllers. But you could see it's small, and it's 2 layers of copper, one on the top, one on the bottom, with an insulator in between, so there's no shorts. You attach wires to this. It makes a very clean, very easy installation, easy to wrap your head around. Now, what are we attaching? We're attaching ESCs. This is the last part of the puzzle. The ESCs are mandatory for brushless motors. In the olden days, those of you that had shops that did mechanical work and stuff, you know you could take a motor, hook it up to a power supply, and it'll spin. It'll spin at full RPMs being directly connected, whether it's a motor on your car, a motor in the shop that was for some power equipment or something. So brushed motors, you can apply power directly to them and they turn because it's the brushes and the segmented collar around the armature shaft that actually handles all the timing, sequencing power on and off, making the motor do its thing. Brushless motors don't have that luxury. Brushless motors are basically useless, right? There's 3 sets of wires. There's no brushes. They're basically useless unless you have this electronic gizmo to sequence the power through these windings. So an ESC is an electronic speed controller, and this is mandatory for making a brushless motor turn. Now, when you look at the wires on this, there's power input wires, right? The red and the black, those are 2 wires. That's where you apply power to the ESC. Not surprisingly, there's 3 wires that hook up to the, let me hold it off to the side here so you can see it. There's 3 wires that go to the motor, right? Motor has 3 wires, ESC has 3 wires. And then there's this other wire that everyone says, well, what's this one for? This is a 3-conductor lead, so it has 3 wires to it, white, red, and black. Different manufacturers have different colors, but there's always going to be a ground. There's going to be a signal wire, which is the white one, and then there's going to be a power wire in the middle, the red. Now that power wire may or may not be carrying power depending on the type of ESC. That's another little catch, little gotcha. Opto ESCs, as they're called, are not going to have power in that red wire. We can go into that some other time. So let's take a look at this from the perspective of an electron coming out of the battery. Where's it going to go through the helicopter, and what's it going to do on its way? And I think that will help you to understand how all of this stuff works. And then you'll be able to go forward and start planning your first build, maybe with us as part of our group build 2016. So here's the helicopter, right? The multi-rotor helicopter. It's got a camera mount. It's got LEDs on the bottoms of the arms, right? These little dots are LEDs. You can see them better on this one where they were actually cut out. Okay? And it's got a video transmitter down here. Has a second receiver for the camera mount, so it can be operated as a two-person rig. Okay, it's got motors out on the arms where they belong. It's got props. The flight control system is a DJI-A2 with a GPS. Okay, so let's take a look at where the electrons are going once they leave the battery. Okay, so again, here's our battery, and it has the power leads. Okay, the main power leads are where the power comes out and then goes into the helicopter. From the battery, it's going to go to some sort of a power distribution system. And that power distribution system is where the big wires progressively go to smaller wires. Different parts of the helicopter are going to need power in different ways, and this is one of the most confusing parts also, is that every part on the helicopter might not need the same grade of power. It might have different amperage requirements, it might have different voltage requirements, so you have to be sure when you're sending power to a particular component, it's the right power and it's enough power. Okay? When you have a harness like this, we have big wires where the batteries connect, giving way to progressively smaller wires as we go out closer to the motors, and as it splits again for 2 different ESCs, the wires get smaller still. Anywhere along here, you can pull full battery voltage just by tying in and tapping in with smaller wires. You could take something like these that are on this board, solder them into place on these 2 wires, and right there you have a tap for a regulator for LEDs, something for your FPV gear, whatever it is. So there's a lot of options when it comes to power distribution. So the electrons come out of the battery, out the main leads, go into the power distribution system, and then go out to different parts of the helicopter. The biggest draw from your batteries are going to be your motors. Okay, so from the battery, power distribution, it's going to go to your ESCs first. And again, the ESC, this is a big one for an airplane, so I just have it for an example. The most power is going to go to your ESCs. And the ESCs have heavier wires accordingly because they have a big power requirement. And then to the motors, they're a little smaller usually. And this lead, again, is going to go usually to your flight control system, because while this is the power in, this is the power to the motors, which is making the motor speed happen. This is the control system from the flight controller, which is telling the ESC how fast the flight control system needs the motors to be turned. So the white lead here and the white wire, the signal wire it's called, is actually sending all of the control information from the flight control to the ESC. And each ESC is controlling each motor independently. So just looking at my notes here for the ESCs are always going to get full battery voltage in. They're always going to apply full battery voltage out to the motors, but it's going to be sequenced is what determines the speed. Now inside this ESC, there's something called a regulator. So if this battery is 22.2 volts just coming down the pipe here, the regulator in here is actually going to knock that 22.2 volts down to 5 or 6 volts usually. Sometimes the ESC allows you to select that voltage. Sometimes it's fixed in the ESC. If it's fixed, it's usually going to be 5 volts. If it's selectable, it's going to be 5, 6, maybe more, depending on the ESC. But what happens is there's a regulator in here, and the voltage in this red wire is coming from that regulator. And what that's going to do, excuse me, in some cases, it's going to power your flight controller. In some cases, it's going to power the receiver for your radio control system. Got one of those in here too. So here's the receiver for the RC system. It's going to get power sometimes from that voltage regulator that's built into your ESCs. So the power is coming into the ESCs. The ESCs are sending the sequenced power out to the motors to make them turn at the specific speed that the flight controller is calling for. But then power is also going from those ESCs to the flight controller, to the receiver, to power that so that you actually have control of the helicopter. Okay, now, as far as the motors go, we talked about 2 wires versus 3 wires. We said they're pretty much useless without the ESCs. Brushless motors were pretty innovative when they first came out because they're so light and they make so much power for how much they actually weigh. Just like the batteries, these things were a giant step forward because they make so much, there's so much energy stored inside of this battery compared to nickel metal hydride or NiCads, which were the older generation packs. Yeah, so that's it for the ESC. Regulated power comes out, full battery power goes in, and then also full battery voltage goes out through the motor wires. One of the precautions, both of these motors will turn a 10-inch prop really well. This one weighs a lot less than this one, especially when you consider that there's potentially up to 8 of these on an octocopter. So don't get in the habit of thinking more motors better. These motors do get heavy after a while as you get bigger and bigger. They become less efficient also when you're asking a big motor to turn a little prop. So keep in mind that you want to design for the specific helicopter that you're designing. So from that power distribution system, there's a lot of other things that are going to need electricity, and this is where it generally gets complicated. You might have, here's a list that I have, you're going to have power for the flight control system. Sometimes it's going to come from the ESC wire. Sometimes it's going to come from the batteries for the flight packs because the flight control board will have its own regulator built into it. So you have to check with the equipment that you're planning on using. Sometimes with some flight control systems, Hoverfly, it worked really well to have a separate battery powering just the flight controller. FPV cameras, Scott talked about it a couple of episodes back. They all have different power requirements. So some might want 5 volts, some are going to want 12 volts. Some of them accept a range, 7 to 22 volts. They're able to do that because they have their own little voltage regulator built in. Whatever you put in, it regulates it down to whatever it needs for you. Your RC receivers are typically going to run on anywhere from 4.8 volts up to about 6 or 7 volts. There are newer ones that run at higher volts, so just check your equipment. And if you see a theme developing here where I keep saying check your equipment, that's because you have to check your equipment. Video transmitters. Usually the video transmitters run on a range of power because they have regulators built in. And let me see what I have here as an example. I have this small one. This is from like an FPV racer. And this one takes, I believe, anywhere from 7 to 24 volts. And then it has an output. No, this one doesn't have an output. But it does have a regulator built in, which is what allows it to take that range of voltages. I forgot to grab the other one. Just real quick, I keep talking about voltage regulators. These are 2 voltage regulators that you might find in the course of building multi-rotor helicopters. This one is from Castle Creations. This is a 10 amp. They call it a BEC because it's a battery eliminator circuit, which means if you're running one battery, you happen to need a lower voltage. You don't have to run a second battery. You just run a little regulator and you wire this up and you tune it in using a multimeter and it gives you the voltage that you want. This one, widely available on eBay for about $1, is a regulator. Pretty bare bones, but it works great. It's tunable to the voltage output that you want. These are lovingly referred to as buck converters because they cost $1. All right, you buy them by the dozen if you're going to buy them at all. All right, LEDs use power. You might have servos on board for a release mechanism, depending on what your application is that you're building your helicopter for. You also might have retractable landing gear, which is a servo mechanism that raises and lowers the gear in order to get the landing gear up out of the way for a helicopter with a camera mount that's able to pan 360 degrees. So these all require power, and this is where it starts to get ugly. So this is what I recommend, and then we're going to be wrapping this up. Scott's got a long drive home. So here's what I recommend. You start to hash out your equipment. Okay, you start to get an idea of what it is that you want to do and what you're going to need to do it. You make a list. On the left-hand side of your list, you write in. On the right-hand side, you write out. All of this equipment, whether it's a camera, a transmitter, a flight control system, all has voltage requirements going into the equipment, and they're all going to have some sort of signal or output that you're going to need to send somewhere else, like your camera. The camera is going to take power, but then it's going to send a video signal to the transmitter. So a good way to understand all of this is to first list the components that you want to build or that you want to include in your build, and then go down the left side, the ins, and say, what does each thing need in the way of power or signals in? Make a list. Some things are going to say full battery power, like your ESCs are going to get 4S or 6S voltage. Some things, like your video transmitter or your flight control system, are going to get a reduced amount of power. It's up to you as the designer of this to decide where are you going to get that power from. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to answer all those questions right here, right now. But I'm telling you, you need to be prepared as you're preparing to do these builds. You need to be prepared to answer these questions. And we'll help you at Multi-Rotor Forums. I hope as some of you are coming to the site and finding it to be a good resource, I hope you're out there helping each other. But by mapping out all of your components and then what they need going in and what they need going out, it's going to make it all start to make a little sense, because you're going to see there's variations. It's not as easy as you thought sometimes maybe to find 5 volts on your helicopter to put into the video. To put into your FPV camera, for instance. Okay, so moving forward with our group build 2016 at the website, the thread is already there. We've already been talking about this. Some of you have jumped ahead, and that's good for you guys that you've been able to get information from the website and from each other and be able to get your build started. Some of you are already flying, I think. But we're going to do this. We're going to build the helicopter first, and we're going to incorporate, what's going to make it different this year at least, is we're going to incorporate the FPV gear, and I'm going to make a series of videos to explain all of this, and I'm going to do it in much greater detail than I'm doing it right now. This is just an introduction, not just for our group build, but for people that are also maybe coming across this for the first time and saying they're interested, but they are clueless as to how all this stuff works. So the last little bit of the puzzle that we need to explain real quick is the actual radio control system, because that's what makes the magic happen, really. So this is a JR system. It's a system I've been using for years. It's been very reliable. And this is almost identical to this, which is an old Futaba system. And you know it's old because it has this big long antenna attached to it. So this is a system that was used before the 2.4 gigahertz systems came along. They're almost identical. The software is different. The quality of the gimbals has evolved a little bit, but you see switches, you see knobs, you see the 2 sticks. The system that these run on is called PWM, and it's almost identical in this one as to this one. There's little things like resolution, the number of steps from one side of the stick to the other, little details like that that are different, but it's still basically the same concept, digital proportional radio control. So what this does is it has a number of channels that enable you to control an aircraft. And your helicopter, right, here's your basic MQX, an old Blade, I think it was. Yeah, Blade. This thing, the 4 basic channels of control are tilt or pitch, right, front and back, roll, side to side, yaw, which is like this, and then throttle, which allows the motors to spin faster or slower for climbing, descending, whatever. And those are the 4 basic flight control channels. Now, there's additional needs from your radio to be able to control the helicopter. If you have a gimbal, you might have a tilt control, you might have a shutter release. Depending on the complexity of the flight control system, you might have different modes. There's manual modes, there's auto flight modes, there's GPS modes, there's carefree mode, there's a switched fail-safe option on a lot of flight control systems. You can switch between cameras if you have multiple FPV cameras for a front view or a back view. All these different functions require channels for control. So it's not unusual to see people flying multi-rotor helicopters with 16 channels, 18 channels, or higher even. And this is a basic 9-channel system, which gives me a lot of options for control. And I've been able to live with this. I haven't had to buy a higher channel system. But figure for a basic multi-rotor helicopter, you are going to want at least 5 or 6 channels. If a buddy of yours that flies RC has a system like a Spectrum DX6, DX6i I think is a real common one in the classifieds used. You could buy them for 80 or 90 bucks. 6 channels will get you pretty far along. It'll do mode selection, it'll do GPS mode selection, plus your 4 basic flight controls. If you wanted to add retracts, that's another channel. So 6 channels will get you started. If you know you really want to do this and you're going to be doing it for a while, buy at least 9 channels. At some point down the road, if you can justify 12 channels or more, that's a decision you can make at the time. And that's outside the scope of this basics conversation. But I hope I've answered some of your questions. I hope I've given you an idea of how these work. And I hope I've helped you to understand a little bit about understanding how all the different components come together and how they relate to each other to make the whole system function as a usable aircraft. Okay? As always, if you have questions, come to multirotorforums.com. Get my attention, Scott's attention, soon to be Bill's attention. We'll help you to answer questions. If you saw people on here today like Patrick Roy, you have questions about the presentations they gave, come to the website and ask questions. The YouTube text below the video screen will have links to anything that was mentioned today. We'll also have that at the website. And that's it. Welcome to 2016. I hope you like the new studio. We're going to be back next week. Our special guest next week is Professor Javier DIEZ from Rutgers University. You might have seen his video of the NAVIATOR drone on YouTube. It's an octocopter, a coaxial quadcopter that flies and then dives underwater, and the propellers and the flight control system continue to stabilize and move the thing through the water. He's actually at Rutgers University, about 40 minutes down the road. He's coming here with some of his student assistants. They're bringing one of the NAVIATOR drones here, and it's going to be an awesome episode. I can't wait to see this thing. I've been in touch with Professor DIEZ. He seems like a nice guy. I think we're going to have a great show. So the next show is January 27th, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, coming to you live from our studio here in Clinton, New Jersey. Everything's archived on YouTube. We're always available, Multi-Rotor Forums. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the show.